Welcome into a special episode of the Cape Copcast, Chief Chat Edition, where I'm actually the host. I'm Anthony Sizemore, the police chief with the City of Cape Coral Police Department. And today, I'm going to be doing an interview, which is kind of strange. I'm usually the one that answers the questions here, but I'm going to host, and I have a good friend and colleague of mine. He's a major crimes detective, Mike Lasalandra, and we're going to talk about a very interesting case to give the public an update as to some activity that happened a couple of weeks ago in the northern part of Cape Coral. We're going to talk about what that was, what were we doing, how does it link to a news story from about 2 years ago, and ultimately, how does it link to a news story from 1985? So without further ado, welcome, my friend.
Good morning, Chief.
Good morning. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
I think it's safe to say you are slightly out of your comfort zone.
A little bit.
Just relax. We're talking to the good folks who are interested in this. So we'll back up about 2 weeks ago, and there was some activity out off of Kismet Parkway where members of the public and the media saw excavators, tents set up, a lot of forensics personnel, and a lot of police activity. And what we were doing was related to something that happened 2 years ago. So I'm going to back up 2 years. So in 2024, there's a young man who's out either kayaking or in a small boat, fishing, I believe, and he finds what he thinks is a human skull. So he does the right thing, calls the police, we go out there, and we recover it. And indeed, it is a human skull. And at that point, the protocol is we contact our partners at the medical examiner's office and say we have found what we believe to be human remains, and they take custody of it, and then they begin doing testing because we need to find out who this is. You know, that is very unusual, and it is right in our wheelhouse when you get something like that to investigate. But you can't really investigate something like that until you know who. I mean, ultimately or immediately you start looking at missing people, and maybe it's going to be this person, maybe it's going to be that person. It could be somebody who's from a totally different part of the country. You just don't know. So the number one thing you got to do is identify who your victim is, and that's with any case, and then you start to widen out your circle, and then you don't widen the circle out until you can identify and or eliminate people that are close to that person. But the number one thing you got to do is identify that person. So the medical examiner's office has it. It is a very painstaking process. So that's one of the questions that we got is what took so long from 2024 to 2026? And it's just the scientific process of extracting biological material to get a DNA test to be able to get an identification. And we did that, and we got the results very recently, and it was identified as a missing person named Rose Gayhart, who was missing from 1985. So that's a little bit of what we were doing, and once we found out that's who that was, we're going to widen the search out at that spot and see if there's any other material. And that's the reason why it wasn't done then to now is we don't even know what this is or who this is. And then we start digging, excavating, looking. So why don't you take us back to 1985 and kind of give us a little bit of understanding on this case and who Rose Gayhart is, all the way up to what you're doing now.
Okay, Chief, thank you. So in 1985, Rose Gayhart and her boyfriend, Robert Paddock, moved from Western New York, Dansville, New York area, to North Fort Myers. They left New York sometime around Christmas in 1984, and we're going to move in with Robert Paddock's mother, Dorothy Rittenhouse. Ultimately, they did make that move, and they got a trailer of their own in the same trailer park of North Fort Myers. And
okay, so Rose she's not a local initially, so she lives in Western New York, kind of south of Rochester or in the Rochester metro area.
South of Rochester, maybe, I think about 20 miles.
Okay, so they make a move. They're coming down to Florida, and they settle in a trailer park in North Fort Myers.
Yes. Robert Paddock goes to work for a janitorial service in Cape Coral, and Rose Gayhart begins working at a diner in North Fort Myers. She later works at a couple different jobs. They're here for a few months, and ultimately she gets a job in Cape Coral, working at Big Howie's hot dog stand on 47th Terrace.
And some of our old Cape residents will remember Howie's hot dog stand. That's a real throwback to the 80s. So they're living in North Fort Myers. They both take jobs, trying to start their way in Southwest Florida. And what we find, or what you have found, is that at some point in 1985, the relationship between the two starts to hit the rocks.
Yes. So there are police reports from a detective in New York that handled the case there early on, as well as some detectives from Cape Coral. And it culminated in information that there was some domestic discord between Gayhart and Paddock. That resulted, at least on one occasion, of her leaving the trailer park on her own with a suitcase that was witnessed by neighbors in the trailer park and documented in police reports. And it appears that at some point they got back together and they moved to an apartment in Cape Coral, up off of Coronado,
Okay.
not too far from Howie's.
So they're having domestic troubles. That's documented by witnesses back in the 80s and police reports from domestic violence incidents. And she's seen leaving with a suitcase. Now, you might think that would be the point in which she's missing, but you're telling me that there was since that time, they either reconciled or got back together enough that they moved from the trailer park in North Fort Myers to a duplex or an apartment or something in Southeast Cape.
Yes.
Okay.
Some of that information is conflicting in the police reports. However, there is a job application from Howie's that Rose lists the address in Cape Coral. So it does appear she was living there, and witness accounts say that for the few days that she worked there, she walked to work. So she was within walking distance, and it appears that she was living in Cape Coral at that time.
Okay. And you mentioned police reports. So this is an interesting deal. There's been an evolution in the way missing persons reports are filed, and that happened in the late 2000s, mid to late 2000s. But prior to that, it was a little bit loose in who had jurisdiction on missing persons reports. So you got family of Rose in upstate New York or Western New York who haven't heard from her. They had been corresponding by letter, which was that was the time. There wasn't Facebook and texting or anything like that. So they were writing letters back and forth, and the family was concerned. So they tried to do a missing persons report up in that jurisdiction. There's concerned people here that tried to make a missing persons report. So there's a little bit of a mishmash of the reports that ultimately get coalesced together. But so that's the reason why we keep referring to reports from New York, is because there were almost parallel investigations going on during this time. So
That's true.
Continue. So she's working in the Cape. They're living in the Cape. And at some point, we don't hear from Rose anymore. Tell me about that.
On March 21st, her last day working at Howie's.
Of 85.
Of 85,
Okay.
1985. She is apparently seen getting into a red pickup truck with a white male. Short time later, according to his account, Robert Paddock shows that up at Howie's to pick her up and is advised this. Later on, the owner of Howie's is interviewed by a Cape Coral detective, and he gives the same information. Prior to that,
So not the boyfriend. So this is there's witness information that a male in a red pickup truck picks up Rose. Doesn't look like a kidnapping. Looks like a voluntary, gets in the truck and leaves. Robert, the boyfriend, shows up later to pick her up, and he's told by staff at Howie's, where she works, she already left. She got in a red pickup truck with some other guy.
Right.
Okay.
On March 17th, there's an account of her also getting into a similar pickup truck with a similarly described unidentified white male at Jim's Pub in North Fort Myers.
Okay.
She was known to, or at least the police reports reflect at that time that it was told to them that she was known to frequent Jim's Pub, which is in close proximity to the trailer park that they were living at the time.
Okay. Now we got 2 sightings documented in police reports. Correct. That she's with some unidentified white male, looks like or appears to be willfully traveling with this guy in a red truck. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So detectives here were corresponding with detectives up in New York, and they did go to Jim's Pub and show her picture around. They ultimately had a witness contact them and give them that information. What becomes peculiar at this point is her paramour, her boyfriend, Robert Paddock, does not report her missing. He's urged to report her missing by his employer.
So she's last known by Robert to be going to work at the hot dog restaurant or quick take restaurant. He shows up to pick her up. Word is she already left with somebody else. Since then, she was supposedly seen with the same descripted male at Jim's Pub, but nobody in her circle has seen her since around that time. So, and we had talked before the pod that people that Paddock worked with that knew Rose said, "Hey, you got to report her," and
That's right.
He's reluctant to do so.
He's reluctant to do so to the point that one of the owners of the business that he works for contacts police herself, and it's documented in the reports at that time that she feels there is foul play involved. He will not report her missing and had never reported her missing. About 3 months later, he relocates from Cape Coral back to New York.
He goes back home.
Yes. Some documented statements he made at the time to his employers was that whoever took her probably dumped her in a swamp somewhere. That statement's repeated years later during a polygraph examination that was administered by the New York State Police and documented.
On this case?
On this case.
Okay.
Because of the delay in jurisdiction, as you were explaining, and I kind of have firsthand knowledge of that because I was actually a cop back at that time.
A young cop.
Yeah. Police reports were taken for missing persons very similarly to how you describe. If someone was not, there wasn't really a particular location where they were seen last. A lot of times it came back to the home jurisdiction where she was originally from, and maybe family members reported missing, which ultimately happened in this case. Her parents urged New York authorities to report her missing, and in early 85, she was reported missing and a case was opened in New York, and she was entered into the National Crime Information Computer as a missing person.
Okay. So we were kind of loosely 2 jurisdictions working it. It becomes official once, and again, we're talking about 40 years ago, the ownership, if you will, of the investigation finally gets established. So the ownership at this time is in Western New York. The police department or the law enforcement agency there elicits the help of New York State Police, which is New York State Police is different than Florida State Police. They do a lot more local law enforcement. They do a lot of what you would call traditional police work in some of the smaller areas throughout New York. So it's a police agency that's doing city work, and they're working the case. They're contacting us. They're coming down. They're going to Jim's Pub. They're going to different places. But all we know at this point is Rose is gone.
Rose is gone, and our Cape Coral police detectives assisting New York prior to Robert Paddock leaving the area at their New York authorities' request, go over to his house, and they obtain Rose's belongings that she left behind. Rose left behind paperwork, birth certificates, clothing. I think there was some thought at the time maybe she just ran off, but some of those circumstances are unusual to leave without clothing or any personal important documents that you might have.
Right.
Complicating the situation a little bit is the Cape Coral detectives that are working it are contacted by an air conditioning company in Fort Myers who believe that Rose may have worked there the end of March, in the beginning of April. And they claim, or the representative there that was interviewed, claimed that Rose left instructions that she wasn't coming back to work to send her last paycheck to her mother. That never happened. And to my knowledge, at least from the police reports, I don't know that they ever made a solid identification that the person they were talking about was actually Rose. It appears that it could have been, a misidentified person. There may have been a story or two in the local media at that time,
Right.
publishing her picture, and someone, thought they knew her, but
And that happens in cases like that,
Sure.
where people subconsciously, certain things in a story, and there's gaps, and subconsciously you could fill in those gaps with things like that. Like, oh, I think I know who that is, or I saw that person. It's frustrating when you're working a case, but it's not unusual, right? I mean, you've worked a lot of
Sure.
these major cases. A great lead is a great lead until the second that it's not, and then it's not a good lead. It can be very frustrating.
Right. So, in particular, missing persons cases have come a long way since the 80s.
Sure.
Some of the information and copies of some of the documents from New York I can recognize from being a cop back then. Basically what went out when someone was discovered, when remains were discovered, as it happened in this case, was just a teletype would go out. The teletype would go out to the agencies, law enforcement agencies, nationwide, statewide, however you selected to do it, and it would be up to them to review it and try to match it to a case that they had. There also, were occasions where missing persons posters flyers were made, and they were sent out to law enforcement agencies, and they would be hung up in detective bureaus or police lobbies or post offices sometime. But there was no, video cameras everywhere like there is
Right.
today. There
Wasn't
was no
very
social
scientific.
media. No, there was no electronic tracking of any type of devices that you might have, or social media tracking. So it was basically a shot in the dark. This is what we have. Here's the information that we have. If you come across anyone that looks like this, contact us.
Help us, yeah.
Right.
All right. So let's fast forward a little bit. So she's been a missing person in the NCIC, or National Crime Information Center. And NCIC is a network that every law enforcement agency, for lack of a better word, subscribes to. And if you got a missing person or a stolen vehicle or a homicide suspect you're looking for, you put it into that. It's almost like a digital billboard that we all check. And then if I come across somebody and I run their name, I'm out with this guy, it'll hit if his name and information is in NCIC. Hey, if you're out with that guy, hold him, because Phoenix, Arizona needs to talk to him about a murder case. So that's what NCIC is. And it's flooded with cases like this. So she is, at the time, forever listed as a missing person. But as 40 years go by and witnesses get older or they die, cases get transferred, they can become cold. So she is a missing person out of Western New York officially, but lived here. So it's kind of a commingled jurisdictional, very, very challenging case that's sitting cold. And 2024, a good citizen of our city saw something, said something. He didn't say, well, that's weird, and keep going. He actually said, hey, I got to report this, which is a big credit to that young man. We go out, we take it because things have evolved tremendously now, and we have the ability to do stuff, and it's just the way that we operate is you see that, we're gonna jump on it. ME gets the ME medical examiner. ME is what we call it. The ME gets the skull, extracts the DNA, does the scientific testing. It is an arduous, long process. Meanwhile, the gears are turning. We're moving, for a city of almost 250,000 people and just running and gunning. Then we get word, hey, we got a match. So there must have been some kind of DNA on file to compare it to, right? You don't take a skull, put it into a system, and the computer goes, oh, I know that's Rose Gayhart. There has to be something to compare sample to sample. So somewhere along the decades that this case was working, either Cape Coral or New York was able to obtain a familial DNA sample to be able to make a comparison that gave us the confirmation that this skull belongs to Rose Gayhart, our missing person.
That's right. So New York investigators obtained DNA from Rose Gayhart's sister and mother before she passed away, and that was the sample that was matched.
So it's sitting in the database.
Correct.
Is how you do that. So if you have ownership of that case, so we're the detectives in New York, you do that. You get dental records if you can. You get DNA now, which is even better, and then you put it in a bank, and you wait for something like this to happen for sample A to match with sample A that's over here, and that's what happened. And now the way jurisdictional things work, she was missing there, but if you have a deceased person here, that investigation is where it is. That's ours. So you, being one of our experienced, successful major crimes guys, gets the Gayhart case. Yeah. So over the last, I don't know, probably feels like years for you, you've been going through so many pieces of evidence and information and flying up to New York and working with those investigators and talking to people and really trying to put together a puzzle from the 80s. And it's a painstaking, arduous job, but you've actually made a lot of headway. I know some of it we can't talk about here, but even a case this old, there's information from people that can be helpful. And this would be a great opportunity for you to solicit, what are we looking for? I mean, I haven't done major crimes in a while. I used to, but I would think, does anybody know anybody that was driving a red truck back in that time? But I'm sure there's more to it. So why don't you tell me what would be some pretty helpful information for people that were here, maybe working in the trades, working in the restaurant industry. There's a couple of bars up on 41, just north of the Edison Bridge, where I think Price Cutters is there now. Across the street, there's some bars. But back then, there were a couple of hot spots. So yeah. I would think something like that, or you tell me.
The case takes a couple interesting turns when you take a look at
we like interesting turns.
All the reports and information that New York generated in their investigations. They've had several detectives work on over the years, and the information that comes from our side. There was some information that came back to law enforcement that there was a conflict or a real dislike between Rose Gayhart and Robert Paddock's mother, Dorothy Rittenhouse, to the point where...
And she was here too.
She was here.
Okay.
To the point where information surfaced that she may have had something to do with her disappearance. She passed away in 2020, and to my knowledge, never admitted or was interviewed relative to that information. The problem is that, well, one of the problems can be in a case like this is during the first parts of the investigation in the first year or so, many people are interviewed. And later on, some information may surface and may never get to the police, may never get to the investigator. Some people were re-interviewed in this case, and some of that information or information similar to that came to the surface. Years later, I spoke to this person, or years later, this person told me this. It's, talk, and either it's not, they don't believe it's of value to the investigation, or never got around to maybe calling the detective, or, quite frankly, in the case of old people forget about what happened,
Right.
She has some family members that hadn't forgotten what happened, but a lot of people that are involved in this case passed away. Somewhere around 1970, an individual by the name of Roland Davis moved from Ohio to the Fort Myers area. He was living in Southwest Florida with his family, his mother and siblings, and his mother was part owner of a bar on Route 41 called the Mayfair. Mayfair is about 2 miles from Jim's Pub. Roland Davis was not a stranger to law enforcement. He had contacts with law enforcement both in Ohio and Florida. He was married several times to women in both Florida and Ohio as well, and ultimately was charged in a murder in Ohio that occurred in 2000. Apparently, he was traveling back and forth between Florida and Ohio regularly. He was working up there. He was working as a cab driver. One of his passengers was an elderly lady, and he was able to get into her house, and he murdered her. That case opened a door to Roland Davis's activities throughout past years.
He became very interesting to Southwest Florida investigators on a multitude of cases at that point.
Yes, he did.
He matched the MO for a couple of unsolved cases.
Actually, quite a few.
Yeah.
And most of them were women that had been murdered. Some had been sexually assaulted. Charlotte County Sheriff's Department was investigating I guess you'd call it a cold case, or a case that had become inactive that occurred in 1990. A woman was murdered in her home. And ultimately, a piece of evidence was identified with his DNA on it, and their investigators found that he had actually worked at that house on a couple of occasions doing some landscape work. In between those two murders, he was charged in Ohio with kidnapping and trying to murder another woman who got away. Ultimately, I think that case was dropped. However, Charlotte County did a very in-depth investigation and believe that he's a suspect in quite a few murders of women that occurred in areas where he was known to be at the time. When they interview him, one of the locations he says he frequented was Jim's Pub. Jim's Pub is a location in common with Rose Gayhart.
That was kind of her spot.
Right. He fits the general physical description of the person driving the truck, and past that, there's not a lot of information about that person, that truck, or any kind of interaction between Rose Gayhart and this person.
Right. So you got, obviously, he's a horrible person, not the most trustworthy when you talk to him. You can't believe a lot of the things that they say. His mother owns, and he frequents a bar that's within throwing distance to the bar that Rose goes to. He's been known to be there. Rose's boyfriend at the time is really not the most believable. I'll say it, not the most upstanding, believable person here. So there's a challenge for you, and then you throw the time and the age. But there are still a lot of people here that can remember going to Jim's Pub or the Mayfair or that case, or may remember, seeing those descriptions, or there's something that this may spark that would prompt somebody to remember something that without any other information or in a vacuum wouldn't seem like it would be a big deal. But it could be could be a pivotal thing. Right. So that's what we're looking for, is any information that you may have. And one thing I'll tell you is that works. That stuff does help. And this agency in particular has had success with older cases. I hate the term cold case, because cold means we ain't doing anything with it. Mm-hmm. We're doing a lot with it. It's just old. But it's important that if somebody knows something that may seem small, and maybe it is, worth a phone call. And if it's not small, it could be something that could be very pivotal to help you and ultimately get justice for Rose, for her family, and really have a better outcome than what she's got right now.
If anyone from Jim's Pub or frequenting Jim's Pub knew someone that drove a red pickup truck back then, back in the mid-'80s, that, frequented that bar or had any information, it'd be valuable to get for a couple of reasons. We know that Rose was alive on March 17th, and we know we have at least one witness that says she was with this guy in that pickup truck at Jim's Pub on the 17th. Maybe he was just a friend that was giving her a ride home, and he has nothing to do with her disappearance.
Sure.
It would be, to go down that road, we need a starting point and some type of information on who that person could be. If anybody can remember back that far, it'd be great information for us to get.
I mean, we're not trying to pin it on some guy with a red truck.
Right.
If they were friends talk to friends. Rose may have confided in this guy what was going on, or point us in some other direction. So that would be a pivotal piece. Any information that we could get, we will take at this point.
Right.
So very interesting stuff. Sure puts a lot of backstory and context into what people saw in the news recently, because, we have people move into the area, every year, every day, that don't know that. And they see, what are the police doing? It looks like some kind of CSI files, they're sifting through dirt, and there's a reason for that. And that's the backstory on it. You're a busy guy. You got a lot. This isn't your only case. That's the other thing too, is people think that your full-time 40-hour plus a week job is this. You got a case load, and I appreciate you taking the time to come in and chat with me and educate me on what we're doing, and definitely educate everybody out there as to what we're doing with Rose's case, and a little bit of a wider view on how we work any of these cold cases. It's really effort, right? E equals R, effort equals the results, and you got to put the effort in, and you got to talk to people, and we used to call it shake trees.
Yeah. That's the thing,
I knew you would hear that.
Yeah, shake the trees. This is a case where it's going to rely on interviews and people that can remember things. There's not really a whole lot of, or an aspect of technology other than the DNA.
Right.
It's just kind of an old, hit the street and ask questions kind of case. And
it's a throwback.
Close doors and rule people out and try to develop a suspect. Obviously, if it was Roland Davis, he's died. If there was anyone else out there that is responsible and we could find them and bring them to justice, we're going to do it.
That's a perfect way to wrap right there. Well, Mike, again, thank you, and thank you for listening to us. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed it. A little behind the curtain look, and if it's successful, if you like it, maybe we'll start doing a little bit more deeper dive on some of these cases. I don't mind doing it. It's very informative and educational, not only for me, but for you. And we'll put on the screen how you can contact us to get us that information. So I appreciate it. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Cape Copcast, where we dive into the heart of the Cape Coral Police Department safety initiatives, community relations, and the insightful stories of different officers that make up our department.
Please like and share our podcast. If you have feedback, you can email capepdpao@capecoral.gov. And remember to follow us on social media. Our handle is @CapePD on all major platforms. Stay safe, stay Cape.